Morning, everyone. So today we're going to have a special discussion, and we're joined by Kim Smith, who is PhD researcher at the Centre for Food Policy at the University of London, and also trustee of the food charity TastEd. She's also a really kind of vocal food education advocate and campaigner, and I guess also you do a lot within your local community as well. There's lots of initiatives that you're. I'll give you a chance to talk a bit more about you kind of introduce yourself, Kim.
Yeah, I mean that's where I started out was in my own children's school. I've worked across the UK food system for my whole career in various jobs. But when my children went to school, we had a teaching kitchen and nobody was using it, and so I got roped in, and that was a kind of very much the beginning of my kind of experience in food education and teaching children and realizing how little children are taught about food at school. And so, yeah, so that was very much the beginning of that and the beginning of my research, and also when I joined TastEd as well as a trustee.
Do you want to just explain a little bit more about TastEd as a charity and the philosophy and approach?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, TastEd is a young charity. We're 5 years old, and it's dedicated to helping children learn to love eating vegetables and fruit because we know they don't. And we do that through using the five senses. So, it's a very joyful, simple, playful approach to helping children discover their own preferences for different foods and accepting those, but also really starting to begin their food education journey, getting familiar with foods, learning about where they come from. And basically, what we do is we support teachers and early years practitioners. So we don't run the sessions ourselves. We train the teachers and nursery leaders to kind of run sessions with their children. So each one is focused on one of the five senses. So and every session has an opportunity to try the food. But the really kind of grounding principle of TastEd is that we have these golden rules, which are slightly counterintuitive, but it is that you don't have to try the food and you don't have to like it. And what this does is releases any pressure from a child for the expectation of eating something that they are scared of, or they might not think they like, they think they don't like.
Mhm.
Um, but also, it's kind of promoting a kind of an environment of inclusivity in the sense that you may hate mushrooms. I love mushrooms, and that's okay.
Mhm.
So, but also really helping children to understand, and actually helping their adults as well to understand that we have to learn to love different foods. We all learn to probably love drinking coffee because it's sophisticated and a sign of being grown up. So that's the kind of same thing with kind of vegetables as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's what we do.
My experience with the tasted approach, I think it's just this completely sort of refreshing and novel approach, which goes completely against that kind of old wives' tale of, oh, you have to eat it, and you just have to eat this, and sort of almost forcing children to eat things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which again, maybe is part of the reason that we've got quite some unhealthy attitudes towards food and diets and eating.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
before we go any further, though, also part of the reason we're having this discussion is off the back of an event that you hosted at Hackney School of Food, and I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, so basically, TastEd partnered with the Hackney School of Food. We're both kind of young food education organisations, and we really wanted to bring people together to start delving into a conversation deeply about food education and kind of reprioritising it, reimagining what it could look like, and also really getting into some of the issues of that prevent food education from happening in schools. And we were really thrilled to have you come along and do a workshop. So you and I did this brilliant uh, session with people to help to kind of start a discussion about food and sustainability topics because I think in education, certainly my experience has been in education, they're considered to be quite separate. But then the work I've done at the Centre for Food Policy, all the research shows how much of a contributor to climate change and biodiversity loss and water use and things that food system is. But yeah, in education, we're not really connecting those dots at the moment. So that was the kind of beginning of trying to start a conversation around
Mhm.
connecting those dots.
And just to say a bit more about Hackney School of Food, it's kind of on the border, or it is on the site of what's the name of the school?
I can't remember.
It's
That's terrible, sorry.
What we'll do is we'll include it in the description and it'll be fine
Yeah.
and people can go
Yeah.
and see that. But it's this wonderful place which is yeah, on the boundary of the school site, and it's an allotment garden, there's a pizza oven, there's this wonderful outside space. And I guess you could probably talk a bit more about how that space is used both for the community but also for the school.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a real, I think it's quite a blueprint for what food education vision could look like. So, like you say, it's on the school site, and it has a big kind of fully functioning teaching kitchen. And it has Tom, who's the teaching chef there, who is working with children all day, every day. And basically, they have the children come in classes to learn kind of food skills, and then have also extended to the garden recently. But it does, so they are working in the community. So they have lots of children from different schools coming. So it's kind of a hub,
Mhm.
kind of food education hub for the community, but also it's used after school as well for after school clubs, and they run food events as well in the evening. So it's incredible. It's such a beautiful space, isn't it? Where it's like really inspiring to see kind of children really engaging with food in a really immersive way. So yeah, I think it's a blueprint. We should have schools of food in every borough, I
Yeah,
think.
because we said there's We Are Grow is another maybe example of
Yes,
that, but I'm
that's
sure
another
there's
one.
others as well.
Yeah.
But okay, before we go any deeper, what do we mean by food education?
So in my research, this is something I've been kind of grappling with all the time. And the point I've kind of got to is that for me, I take like a food systems approach. So I take a much kind of broader, more comprehensive approach to learning about food. And that is kind of defined by a really wide range of kind of skills and knowledge. So it's the kind of traditional cooking, food preparation kind of skills, and nutrition education as well. So learning kind of about your fat, salt, and sugar. But it's also food culture. It's learning your own preferences. It's connecting to sustainability and climate change, the role of media in food. Like it's a really broad, because actually there's a concept called food literacy, and that has mapped all of these kind of competences that you need by the age of 16. And so for me, when I talk about food education, I mean it in that kind of broadest sense possible. So in schools, that could look like you're learning about fair trade bananas, but you might be growing seeds in your science class, or you might be doing a bit of cooking. So it's kind of really, really broad, and I think it really encapsulates the breadth of skills that we need to be able to eat well and healthily for life, really.
I think it's interesting. There's lots of parallels. So there's obviously climate literacy, and there are schools who are doing that, and there are all their students and staff become climate literate. And I think there's overlaps then with that sense of food
Mm.
literacy. Um, what though, if you were to boil down food education to the nuts and bolts that currently exist, and where it fits within, because I guess what's interesting is you're saying this needs to be holistic across, every aspect of the school. And again, there's parallels in what we're saying around climate and sustainability education. It's not one
Yeah.
subject, but at the moment, are we thinking there's maybe a food, is it called food technology or the GCSE?
Yeah, so you have it currently sits within design technology,
Yeah.
and you've also got I can't remember what the GCSE. I think it's called food and nutrition now. It keeps changing
Okay.
on a GCSE. So my specialism is primary school, so I'm not so familiar with the secondary
Yeah.
school stuff.
And
But yeah,
then,
it's very focused on the kind of more traditional
yeah.
approaches to food education, so the kind of cooking and nutrition. So
Yeah.
that's what it's called. So you've got basically from year one to year nine, you've got compulsory food education in the curriculum under design technology.
Okay.
And it's called, and basically there's like a separate paragraph that talks about cooking and nutrition. And yeah, that's what we have currently in our curriculum.
And then I guess, are there bits in the maybe the PE GCSE
Yeah, so
and
I don't know about the PE GCSE specifically, but I did some research that was looking at primary school curriculums
yeah.
around the world. And I used that kind of food literacy
Hmm.
list of things that I was looking for, so that broadest comprehension of food education. So in England, because obviously education's devolved in the UK, in England, you've got food education happening in the cooking and nutrition in design technology. It's also happening in the curriculum in science. So they learn to grow a seed
Hmm.
and kind of learn how plants grow, which is obviously kind of
Yeah.
food based. And then you've also got lots of kind of nutrition and healthy eating in science as well.
Yeah.
And then you've also got it in the what's now called it's the old PSHE, which is
Yeah, I
now
was
called
going to say this. Yeah,
relationships, sexual health, and healthy eating.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there's a kind of focus on healthy eating in there as well.
Hmm.
And actually, what's really interesting is that there is such a focus on healthy eating in the
Mm.
English curriculum. And what it does is it then doesn't leave space for anything else. So
Hmm.
it's very, very focused on learning to eat healthy. So,
Yeah.
most children know what the eat well plate looks
Yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah. I was going to say that. I've gone into many classrooms where on the wall is the Eat
Classic,
Well
yeah,
plate.
drawing the pictures,
Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, so there's not much room for anything else because obviously there's not a huge amount of time dedicated to it in schools.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it is included
Yeah.
in other curriculums
I
specifically.
think, is it also the case then that maybe the I don't know the best way to describe this, the kind of academic rigor, but also how current that knowledge is there's potentially a bit of a gap.
Yeah,
A lot of that is
definitely.
based on science that is potentially has evolved.
Yeah, and I think so like for example, the government's just announced they're going to be redoing the school food standards
Hmm.
because obviously I think they were developed 10, 12 years ago and the science there has shifted. And it's the same within the curriculum as well. The curriculum was done in 2014.
Hmm.
And those connections around food and climate have not been made in the curriculum.
Mm.
So yeah, it definitely needs updating
Mm.
um, with a
Yeah.
broader perspective.
I guess I can draw parallels again with that sustainability picture in the sense that it's disjointed. There's elements of there's sort of lip service within something like science or geography, but in terms of that holistic picture,
Mm,
joined up nature and the breadth of it, it's still that's missing.
yeah.
What about if we were then to sort of think slightly about some of the organisations involved? Are there any? There's obviously TastEd.
Mm.
I don't know if there's any others that you wanted to mention who are kind of in that space of pushing the boundaries of food education.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many. I think it's really interesting. I think the lack of government guidance and
Mhm.
the basically how you've got generations of teachers now who haven't had food education themselves and the lack of confidence they have around teaching food education. We've had this kind of real proliferation of organizations that are stepping in to bring their passion and their knowledge into schools. And yeah, I mean, there is so much, I always kind of call it a food education army, and it's very, very fragmented kind of space.
Mm.
But you've got a really incredible breadth of organizations. So, for example, you've got the big guns like Food for Life, which is part of the Soil Association's program, which has taken a very kind of whole school approach to food. So they'll look at school meals, they'll look at kind of developing school like parliament type things for
Hmm.
like food action groups, and then they will do stuff around the curriculum as well. But then you've also got other organisations like there's one from the Royal Academy of Culinary Arts. So that's kind of a chefs
Mm.
organisation, and they're called Chefs Adopt a School, and they bring chefs from industry, so working chefs into schools to do kind of more focus on a food preparation and cooking and kind of the skills and
Mm.
kind of the food-based skills. Um, You've also got other organisations like the Harmony Project who are looking at food through the lens of kind of sustainability and climate change and nature.
Hmm.
So there's like really lovely variety. And I think also the other thing to point out is that there's lots on a very local level. So there might be, one person that's, I've got a friend of mine locally who is a chef by trade,
Mm.
but is running stuff in classrooms and after school just as a single person. She's not a kind of big organization. So there's lots and lots of variety, and it depends on the type of food education that
Mm.
schools are looking for as well.
I guess then the overall theme you're saying there is it's fragmented, disjointed. There's not real there's not an oversight that is strategically piecing this together or encouraging or fostering anything. It's kind of
No.
just organically evolved, which therefore
Yeah.
means there's maybe there's some very good things happening, but equally there's a lot of not so good.
Yeah, and it really depends on it's really piecemeal and it really depends on the school. So, and I think that's my biggest concern about all of this is that it really depends on where you go to school. It's a postcode lottery.
Mm.
So, for example, in where I am in Lewisham, my children's school has this very kind of food is really embedded into the school life. So it's kind of they've got lots of outdoor growing going stuff. They've got a cooking program going on. They do stuff after school. They do TastEd, and then this next school along. literally their children only do fruit kebabs once.
Mm.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
all of their kind of cooking experience
Mm.
or food experience.
Yeah.
And that's not fair. That's not the, and also that's not the purpose of the national curriculum. The national curriculum is to
Yeah.
ensure that all children receive the same education. And I think when you've got, you know, things like the climate crisis, our health crisis, you know, people not being able to feed themselves, got kind of real food insecurity problems. Actually, we have a responsibility to equip our children with these skills and this knowledge
Yeah.
so that they can actually look after themselves. So
Mm.
yeah, it's a real just a postcode lottery at the moment. And dependent on the teachers as well, I think, which feels really unfair. I think it's dependent on them going out
Yeah.
and finding those brilliant organizations or developing something themselves,
Yeah.
which with everything else they're dealing with is kind of not really on. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, so
there's
then there's
work
going
to
to
be
be
done.
parallels again with that broader sustainability piece of like, it's often one champion sustainability lead, eco lead, who often isn't even paid. They're almost like
Yeah.
self-appointed. It's
Yeah.
their own passion, and then there's no funding for them. They do it in their spare time, and it's all these things that you think, if it was something like literacy or numeracy,
Yeah.
you wouldn't ever expect anyone to do it because they were just passionate about it. But
Exactly.
then we think these things underpin life on Earth, and
Yeah.
but we're sort of suggesting that they're an added extra,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you can
Or a
kind of
fun
go,
Friday afternoon
yeah,
activity.
yeah, yeah, sort of take it or leave it, and but I guess that does go to the core of then that sense of what a school is for and its
Mm.
purpose. And there's been decades where we've thrown more and more into schools, or there's been
Yeah.
a sense of responsibility around broader societal issues. Because again, I guess
Mm.
the context of some of this food education is then some quite poor. Like health within society, children's health. We've got obesity. I'm sure you can kind of describe that better than me, but that sense that there are all these issues then that schools are having to combat with. And then also, we might be able to touch on this a bit more. We've got shrinking budgets in schools, and therefore food provision or engaging with food is
Yeah.
something that then is marginalized. We've then
Mm.
also got pressures around the school day in terms of the time, and people go, well, we'll take a bit out of that lunchtime. And then you
Yeah.
end up having situations where there isn't anywhere for anyone to sit in school. Lunch is too short, and often children just miss it. And then,
Mm.
well, actually, when are they like eating proper food, and kind of what does that look like? So I guess I've thrown loads into that mix, but I wondered, yeah, there's reasons maybe why we're in the situation we're in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think I think the foundation of that is a lack of government priority on food in schools. It is shifting. I think what's happening in the school meals kind of arena is starting the right conversations. So, you know, making sure that all children whose families are on universal credit get free school meals,
Mm,
and also uh, revisiting the school food standards. But at the moment, I think my ultimate frustration, to be honest, about how it's not seen as a
mm,
priority. And I do really, I actually do see it from. I can understand it from the kind of Department for Education's point of view that, you know, it's about kind of education, not like kind of a social service, which is what schools have to
mm,
step up to quite so much more now than they did before. But actually, I think it comes back to what you were saying at the beginning about the purpose of school.
mhm,
A lot of the reading I've been doing around for my PhD research has been just looking at what the purpose of school is. And I think historically, the purpose of school has been about getting people to work
mm,
and not. So in other countries, for example, like in Norway, where they have this really beautiful food education curriculum, and it's a whole curriculum about food, and it connects all the dots on sustainability and culture and health and things. They look at that purpose of education as developing citizens.
mhm,
And I think, like with the climate change stuff, I think there's a real kind of need to shift what the purpose of our education system is. And I think also like, all the stuff around exams and
yeah,
testing
yeah.
and assessment is also kind of, you know, another kind of point around that actually it's not serving children. And I think there needs to be definitely kind of a pivot around to think about what serves children and what's going to help them and
I,
serve them.
I was going to say earlier on, I think then that also leads to this difference between primary and secondary. And that
Yeah.
there are maybe primary schools who have the space to be able
Mm.
to commit more energy and time to this, and therefore in primary schools it's a much richer experience. And then
Mm.
in secondary schools, maybe it's more likely that it is missed because of that, maybe the external exam focus.
Yeah, and I think also that's a really good point because I think in primary school it is a holistic experience. You've got
Mm,
one teacher teaching all of those subjects, so
mm,
it's kind of much easier to facilitate kind of joined up kind of teaching. So teaching through a topic and connecting that to history and maths and literacy, for example, you can bring food and sustainability very easily in through that kind of cross-curricular teaching.
mm,
Whereas secondary school, you go to this very siloed. And actually, I was at an event recently that was looking at secondary school food education research. And the teachers, the secondary school teachers were there, and they were saying, I don't speak to anybody in science. I don't
yeah,
work with anybody who teaches PSHE or something. And it was really striking how they
they
are very
compartmentalize.
siloed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they don't work across. And actually, they were really excited to think about how they could work across and actually be really supportive
Mm,
and kind of less kind of like the burden was on them with the food side of things, and really creative opportunity. But it is really that exam at the end,
mm,
that focus makes it very reductive and
mm.
a kind of over focused on what the outcome is.
So I
Yeah.
definitely want to get on and talk a bit more about that government piece. But before we do that, I just also wanted to talk more about some of the other organisations that maybe overlap these two spaces. I was saying, so traditionally people might have heard of Meat-Free Mondays. That's a kind of food-related one that's been around for decades. Was it Paul
Yeah.
McCartney and Stella McCartney?
Yeah. Yeah.
Champion that one. And I think
Yeah.
if you look back, that's more than like 10, 15 years old, that one. And it's a funny one because it doesn't feel like it's evolved. It feels like people
Mm.
have almost ticked that box and gone, we do Meat-Free Monday. We've got the base covered.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other initiatives, then we've got things like eco schools. And when you look at the eco schools framework, it's interesting that they don't talk about food explicitly, they talk about healthy living. And maybe I think there might be something in that as well about people's
Mm.
reluctance to really face the idea of food and food education. And again, I wondered, is that something that you wanted to maybe talk a bit more about? Is there's these broader societal attitudes that
Yeah.
make teachers sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable?
Oh, hugely. I mean, I think one of the problems is that it's almost become a taboo subject. I think because of issues like obesity and talking about what people should or shouldn't eat, I think some teachers are very cautious about talking to children about what they eat. And also I was having a conversation the other day as well about picky eaters
Mhm.
and about these kind of labels that we use on people. So I think it's just a bit of a minefield. Um, and so it can, and I think culturally as well, because you were saying, weren't you, about the milk lesson you were
Yes.
doing
Yeah.
in that community as well. So
Yeah.
do you want,
Shall I explain that one? So
yeah.
we've got this alternative milk tasting workshop, and we take in, only a handful soy, oat, maybe rice. I mean, it's a blind milk tasting essentially, and we sort of say, which one do you like the most? But part of that discussion is also, and actually, I've got them just here behind me. We've got these big cards that look at the environmental impact and the broad, both in terms of water use, land use, eutrophication, so like water pollution. Um, and look and basically rank the different milks by their impact on the environment. And what we try and do is say, look, well, you might choose your food firstly by its taste, and you eat things you like. It might be then you think about your personal, sort of health, and you think, oh, I might eat something because it's good for me. And then we try and say, well, you might also choose something dependent on the health of the planet, and there's maybe some things that are better for the planet than others. And so you've kind of got these maybe three factors that influence what you eat. And yeah, there was one school that just they took offense to the idea that we were sort of challenging the traditional idea of cow's milk and saying, oh, well, maybe you might choose not to eat it or drink it. So, and part of that came from the sense that they thought of themselves as being embedded within a farming community and that some of their children came from farming families. And we we as a team sort of thought, wow, well, maybe there is something in this. But instead, what we did is we sort of leant into it and said, this isn't a reason to avoid that discussion. We need to have this discussion and I think some of it has come through, there is far more around farming and the role of farmers in food production.
Mm.
In broader society, we're having those discussions, but maybe we need to have more.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think also there's like religious elements that come into this as well. That some
Yeah.
teachers are uncomfortable because they don't fully understand
Yeah.
the diet, the diet that the children that they're teaching might be eating at home, and what they can and can't eat. Or yeah, I think also eating disorders is another one. And a lot of teachers, particularly at that teenage period, go,
Mm.
I'm going to stay well away from this because they might be blamed for creating more eating disorders. Or and again, it's a funny, it's a sort of a backwards approach if you say
Yeah.
it's a problem, but the best way is to not talk about it.
Yeah,
Mm,
I think people feel ill-equipped, don't they? I think many
mm,
families also feel ill-equipped to navigate children's food choices. It's
yeah,
kind of we've at Tasted we've experienced that a lot where there's a real desperation from families as to kind of like I don't know how to navigate this. It's kind of like what the kind of I always describe it as like once they're weaned, once they're eating, you're done. And
mm,
it's like you're not done. You've got I mean, I've seen it with my own children where they start primary school and suddenly everything you've done goes out the window and they suddenly narrow their food choices. And it happens again as they become teenagers and they start becoming independent in their food choices. And it's a constant thing. But I think as a society, I think we feel ill-equipped to kind of know how to navigate. And I think that particularly exacerbated by the way the food world we now live in
yeah.
is quite unrecognizable and we don't, really have that much choice necessarily either. So I think it's a really challenging environment. And I think as a teacher, if you haven't been trained
Yeah.
in what is appropriate to be talking about with children with regards to food, I think it must feel like an absolute minefield. And to be honest, I've got 25 plus years working in food. It's food's my life and my hobby and my work, and even I can feel a lack of confidence around that sometimes. So
Mm.
I think there's a lot we could do better to support
Do,
teachers.
do you know any universities who do teacher training who do approach food education, and that is part of a general PGC for primary, or is there any best practice in that space?
So it's shifting. So in terms of like there's a decreasing number actually, concerningly, of places that where you can qualify as a food teacher for secondary school.
Hmm.
And there's a real decline in food teachers for secondary schools. They're having to kind of use like art teachers or PE teachers to teach the food bit. So that's a real problem. But there are, and I don't know of any primary school teacher training that specifically covers food. But what we've just been doing at TastEd, because of exactly this reason, I was kind of like, we need to go back to kind of the roots of teaching and it needs to be included. So we're working with Anglia Ruskin University and we've just done a pilot with training all of their PGC primary teachers in TastEd.
Hmm.
And again, much like in the classroom, it's really challenging to fit. They've got so much to cover,
Mm.
but we've worked with them, and they've because it's a new course, so we've been able to kind of start as we mean to go on.
Yeah,
And yeah, so we had like an afternoon. Or was it a whole day? I think it was a whole day teaching them, and then like supporting them to kind of
yeah,
go out into their schools and run it in their schools. But
yeah.
that's the only thing I've seen. Oh, and the other thing is Leith's which was a kind of a cookery school. They have pivoted and they are now providing training that meet the kind of teacher trainer qualifications
What's the name of the organization?
around
Is it Leith?
Leiths. Yeah, Leiths. It used to be Leith School of Food and Wine, and I can't remember what it's called now. I can find the
Yeah, again,
details.
we can
But
include that as a link. Um,
yeah,
just to say, take a step back about that, when we were talking about that broader societal kind of complexity around food, I guess partly that's to do with supermarkets, advertising. There's been a student campaign, is it called Bite Back
yeah,
2030?
yeah.
There are young people who are really facing this and going, no, we
Mm,
want to challenge this. But yeah, it's an increasingly difficult space to navigate for people in terms of
mm,
their food choices. And partly that's again about delivery, food delivery and the kind of accessibility. We've got
mm,
ideas of sort of food deserts in the, the only places that people can access food is fast food, and to get healthy food is increasingly kind of difficult. Um, yeah, I don't know, how fundamental do you think that is as well to all of this?
Oh, I mean, it's really fundamental. I mean, the work I'm doing at the Centre for Food Policy, kind of it's based on a systems approach. So it's food education is quite frequently called as like a that will save the day. Let's just teach our children and they'll be, sorted. But I think the reality is there's too many other things going on in the system that will mean that that is not going to be an effective solution on its own. So we do need the food environments to be healthier, and that includes in schools as well, because at the moment there is a bit of a contrast between what children learn in the classroom and then maybe what they experience at lunch, particularly
Mm,
at secondary school. But also, like you say, like the advertising, we were talking about it yesterday, saying how children learn most of their food information from adverts. They
mm,
are bombarded by advertisements. So all of those things need to be improved as well as also, teaching children the kind of the basics as well.
mm. Um, so one of the other organisations I wanted to talk about, and maybe this will frame also that wider piece, because obviously it's complex in terms of food education because it's also schools are providing, there's an operational element where they provide food themselves. So it's not
Mhm.
as clean as a sort of, it's not like teaching maths where then, I don't know, the school's selling numbers or something. It's that, there's food education and then there's also the school's own provision of food. So
Yeah.
one of the big sustainability initiatives at the moment is called Let's Go Zero, run by Ashton. And what they're doing is helping schools come up with climate action plans where food is then part of looking at moving towards net zero. And I had a look at some of the numbers, and the largest proportion of a school's carbon footprint and kind of impact on the rest of nature is energy. That makes up about 35%. So, again, energy feels like something that schools are quite comfortable with. There
Mm.
are a fair few initiatives to try and move them to renewable energy or to have solar panels fitted. And that's quite a tangible, easy one for a business manager to be able to go, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do that thing. Um, We've then got maybe transport, which is about 16%, depending on the school. It could be higher if it's sort of in a place where there's more people driving. But again, there are a lot of charities working in that space. There's Sustrans and Living Streets, and local authorities are doing lots, and obviously TfL as well in London. But equally, food is actually often maybe higher in terms of its impact than transport. It's maybe the same, dependent on how the school provides its food, but it could be between about 18 to 30% of a school's footprint in terms of carbon. So schools are being encouraged to move to have a net zero plan essentially, but it feels like I think transport's one that again schools are relatively reluctant because they don't want to tell people how they
Yeah.
should travel and what they should do. And again, there's this understanding that there's a broader context of, oh, parents have to get to work or it's public transport's not as easy. So there are these other sort of systemic things that mean
Mm.
it limits people's ability to choose. But food feels like one of those that schools are even more reluctant to sort of engage with in terms of that wider operations piece. Um, yeah, how does this link then, the education piece to the operations?
I mean, it has to link. It definitely, it doesn't always. I mean, there are some incredible schools where it does link. So there was a school called Greenside, which was, they took over their own kitchen and they, brought in seasonal local vegetables. They're making their own bread, so that they were really reducing the kind of the climate impact of the food they were eating, but they were also dovetailing that with really good food education in the classroom and also dialing up what they were doing with their community as well. So really taking that genuine whole school approach to food.
Mm,
And I think that's the real blueprint for what schools can do. And I'm always really disappointed that it doesn't seem to feature very much from a
yeah,
government perspective.
yeah.
Because I think, like you say, it's kind of at the moment it's so piecemeal. And children see the disconnect. They totally get it. They drawing their eat well plate and then it doesn't represent what they're eating at lunch,
Mm,
or at home. So it definitely does need to be joined up much better. And I think that's really interesting around this climate action plans. Um, I'd be really curious to know the kind of what you could do in a school operational in terms of providing all those hundreds and hundreds of meals every day.
mm,
What could be done? There must be a lot of low-hanging fruit. And I'm not even aware of any organisations looking at that either, about the kind of the climate impact of food in schools and how to improve that, because that would be a great lever, wouldn't it? Be a really good motivator if that's a real motivator in schools to get to net zero. And there is government guidance on that, isn't there, I think?
Yeah, there is, there is. I mean, because I guess maybe the thing to say with this as well is people might be surprised by public attitudes to these things as well. That actually diets within wider society are shifting. There
Mm,
has been an increase in, I guess, kind of low carbon diets, and the idea that people are conscious about where their food comes from, both from a planetary kind of climate perspective and nature, but also then the diet element. Um, and that people are receptive to these things because I think again the perception is that if you in a school start to explore this, you'll suddenly get a big response from parents who'll go, "Stop doing this!" I want my and I mean maybe Jamie Oliver and his campaign is part of that. What was it? They were passing
yeah,
McDonald's
yeah, when
with
they're
the
taking
pen.
out Turkey Twizzlers. Yeah,
Yeah, and I
yeah.
think
But
there's
there's
that kind of a more extreme sense of what might the response be.
mm,
I'm sure that your experience is actually parents are far more positive.
yeah, I mean, the work we do at TastEd, I've taught TastEd a lot, and I had parents stopping me in the street going, "What are you doing in that lesson?" My kid's coming home and tells me they're like rocket and salad, and it's like it's the opposite. They're just like, "Oh my God, how can we do more of this? Like, what else can we do to kind of facilitate that?" And I think your whole thing around the kind of the public perception as to what's possible, I think is really interesting because there's a lot of work going on around beans and
Mhm.
pulses at the moment in schools. So there was a big project in Yorkshire, which is part of a research project called Fix Our Food, and they were delivering. So they were doing a big research project that looked at ways to get children to eat the beans
Mhm.
and how to do that through kind of the school meals element, but also through the education side as well. And then you've also got a really brilliant project called Beans is How, which is like this coalition of organizations all around beans and pulses and getting people to eat more of them. And we've developed some resources at TasteEd specifically, and we tested them recently in schools. And the reception was just so overwhelming. Well, the person delivering them was quite astounded at children's reception to eating just plain chickpeas.
Mhm.
And they were kind of, they had pestles and mortars and they were making some hummus with them as well. But fundamentally, they were like, just like, give me more, like just a plain, jarred chickpea. So I think we possibly underestimate our children as well.
Yeah, and it's that sense of our preconceptions limit, and yeah, I guess that's what you're getting at there, that limiting the
Yeah.
possibility and the outcomes and all. And if we as the adults who are kind of intervening in these situations, if we shift the way that we behave,
Yeah.
and yeah, like you say, that's fundamental to the tasted
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we get onto the government piece then? So, you've mentioned the school food standards. So this is
Mm.
a kind of clear set of points that schools should technically adhere to, but I guess there's some uncertainty about how many schools actually
Mm.
do achieve this, and that's around. It's meant to provide young people with a balanced sort of diet. I don't know if you want to go into any more detail of those, but I guess the important piece as well then is what, if there is any, government policy guidance around that broader education piece. I guess you've said it sits maybe within the PSHE program. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't. So when I was doing the research, it came up in the design, technology, cooking, and nutrition, science, and the RSC and healthy eating, and it's it's pretty minimal, really, in terms of guidance. And I always look at other guidance in other subjects to see what teachers are provided with there, and it's given the lack of confidence and lack of experience most teachers have, and I'm talking predominantly about primary school here as well, because they're teaching all the subjects.
yeah,
Um, there's just so little guidance, training, and support, which is why we have this proliferation of other organisations. And I think what's interesting as well is that it's continually overlooked. So, for example, the climate change in education guidance and
yeah,
the strategy that
yeah,
came out didn't,
yeah,
it's such I feel like it's a relatively obvious way to help deliver that strategy,
yeah.
and it's completely missing.
Mm,
And I understand from a political point of view, kind of adjustments to the curriculum are considered to be very risky.
yeah,
So from a policy perspective, that's kind of less less likely, I
Mm.
think.
Yeah.
But I think there are lots of opportunities. One thing I did come across recently through the research I'm doing at the moment was guidance by the it was developed with DfE and the Governors Association.
Yeah.
So school governors are responsible for ensuring the national curriculum is delivered, which does
Mm.
include cooking and nutrition and these other elements of food education. And there is actually some training that school governors can do to support their to kind of understand the whole school approach to food, which includes education. So
Hmm.
that was really refreshing to see that.
Mm.
But there really is on the whole, it's just overlooked at every opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess we can't, again, the picture with governors and school governors is that's quite sort of patchy in the way that that's so to rely on that is not
Yeah.
necessarily the best approach.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're talking about then about this sustainability strategy that the Department for Education released, I think 4 or 5 years ago at least now.
Mhm.
The thing that we traditionally do is do Control F, and we go, does it include
Yeah,
this? Does
me
it?
too.
And I haven't done that with food, but like you
Yeah,
say.
it's not in there.
It's not in there, okay. And
Not
then
really,
the other
no.
piece at the moment is there's the curriculum and assessment review happening,
Yeah.
and I could guess that food is not in the. There's been a provisional guidance, like a document about their progress at the moment, but again, they had I don't know if they're called advisory groups, but they had sort of special interest sort of committees that have been set up around different aspects of the curriculum, and
Mm.
food education was nowhere near that. Again, because the rhetoric around the curriculum is very much around a sort of rich knowledge kind of again going back, and it partly goes into this growth narrative in terms of the government that what we teach in schools needs to feed into the economy and it needs to
Yeah.
be about jobs, which then some of this is not perceived to, though again that's a sort of false narrative because food provision is a really fundamental part to our lives.
Yeah.
um um, so just then also to piece that into the sustainability bit more broadly, the bits that the government are funding and are championing at the moment, we've got the National Education Nature Park,
Yeah.
which I guess food comes into maybe a little bit because
Yeah. Yeah.
RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society, is one of the parts
Yeah.
in the provision of that, and they've had
And
a gardening award traditionally,
yeah,
schools
there's
gardening.
also the Country Trust as well are very heavily involved with that through their program, again with much more of a kind of nature focus, but they are
Yeah.
pushing that food education agenda, definitely.
But again, the sort of the story of that is, we've got if we put all the school sites together, it makes an area twice the size of Birmingham. Let's improve the biodiversity. Well, it's not necessarily coming from a let's improve the food that people are growing within that local area. Because I think this feeds back into what you're saying about best practices. Some of that is where the school is involved within the local community and doing local growing, and that people are hands on, and that's not part of all of this. I think my perception is that maybe the way that government approaches these things is um, an easy way is to give millions of pounds to a single organisation which is of scale and that can deliver something and
Yeah.
that can be measured and we can say we've done this rather than maybe the more meaningful thing which is engaging with smaller local bits of best practice that is harder to essentially fund because you're putting smaller amounts of money, but that
Yeah.
actually might in the long term be a much more sustainable kind of approach.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. No, the need for impact in a 4-year cycle is definitely a barrier to kind of systemic change in education, I think.
Yeah.
That's really problematic.
The other part of this strategy and where the government has been putting its money is in, oh, I guess it's probably not as much money as some of these universities had hoped, but the Climate Ambassadors Programme, which is this network of universities and the Met Office who are, I think there's more than 1,000 of these, and I know Stephen Morgan's one of them now as well, Stephen Morgan MP,
Oh.
um, who are essentially people who are empowered to go and volunteer and support schools, and it may be that they come from expertise themselves. I wondered if you had had any experience of that, knowing of
Oh.
food links.
No, and I'm going to look it up
Okay.
definitely because that
So
would be a really obvious way
yeah,
to
it's
connect
managed by
that.
STEM Learning. So I'm
Okay.
thinking, well, and we know that most of these people are in academia. They're researchers with a climate focused majority, very science
Mm.
driven. And so maybe that food piece is missing from all of this.
Yeah.
But again, it might be because the people interested in food are yeah, I guess maybe not necessarily connected with those things like you suggest.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, uh, what else? I mean, there is another piece I wanted to also talk about is that sense of the relationship with farming and like farm visits and kind of
Mm.
I thought that was an important part of the jigsaw because again, there are is it Leaf organises.
Yeah, the countryside classroom and the farm, is it open farm Sunday and things, isn't it? Getting children onto farms. It's such a valuable experience. And I think it really um, kind of enables that kind of learning by doing. So
Mm,
it's not the eat well play it on a piece of paper, it's immersive. And actually, I think most people remember those kind of things. They're very formative experiences, and particularly for a lot of children. So you've got another organisation, so, I mean, there's so many,
mm,
Farms for City Children. And so, getting children into the countryside and seeing farming happening is really, really vital to see and appreciate it, kind
mm.
of what's going on the ground to make food get onto the plates, I think is an incredible, yeah, and that's a really prolific scheme that is really well, it's not well funded, but
Yeah.
it is happening.
I know, speaking to Richard, I think Harmony, that's also something that they're doing at the moment, is organising lots of farm visits, particularly to farms with a maybe more regenerative approach in terms of what they're doing.
Yeah, amazing.
Um, so one of the other things I just wanted to talk about as well was that sense about how food fits into the sense of identity and community, and how eating together or giving time to both, I guess, grow, prepare, and eat a meal is maybe an important part of learning and education.
Mm.
And also then how that fits into the broad. I don't know if you've got sort of like stories of where you've seen that done really well, or how you think that might fit
Yeah.
better.
Well, we see that a lot with TastEd. I mean, it's a very short opportunity. Lessons are kind of 45 minutes an hour, but what you have is sitting with your peers, a very adored and trusted adult, um, and the transformations that happen in that environment are really beautiful and actually frequent. And actually anybody that teaches TastEd, we've got lots and lots of stories about how, I remember there was a child I took in. I'd been doing TastEd for a long time in the reception class at my kids' school. And I was getting to the point where I was running out of kind of different things to take in. There was kind of like, what else can I take in? And so we've got one lesson which is looking at sound, and it's about you use raw and cooked, and look at the differences between raw and cooked vegetables in relation to sound of how foods sound. And I took cauliflower, so I took raw cauliflower florets, boiled and roasted with the leaves. And I had two children in particular who literally sat on their hands, so they didn't even have to take the plate from me. And they were very sweet and very polite. It's like, not for me, not no, thank you, not for me. And I think this as a signal as to how counterintuitive the rules are. You're very keen for the child to take part,
Mm,
and you really want to encourage them. But I couldn't. I just had to leave the plate there and whatever. And we did the lesson, and gently, and this is the beauty of Taste It, it's a very gentle kind of no pressure activity. And just by, having it near him, it was, a very, that was a challenge enough. He was being really brave. And then, being encouraged, kind of, you can always use your other senses. So you can use your sense of touch and you can see what they feel like and things, and gently getting there. Well, by the by the end of the session, he'd eaten all three, and was absolutely astounded that he could eat the leaves,
mm,
and was really excited. But what was crucial in that was that his friends around him were all diving in. And I've seen it at lunch as well when when children are sat by each other and eating. I remember there's one child that was eating beetroot, and the child next to him was freaked out about how red it was,
yeah.
and not excited as
Yeah.
some children are, but was really freaked out, genuinely scared. And I remember him saying, "You're gonna eat that?" And the kid was like, "Yeah, it's delicious." Like really, like just, of course, it's fine. And just that powerful connection of just eating together transformed, and the kid licked it and then thought, oh, that's okay, and then had a nibble and actually was trying it, and that there's very little time for that.
Mm.
There's very little time for that at lunch because school lunches, like you were saying earlier, is squeezed, but also they're quite overstimulating
Yeah.
environments and lots of mess. So they're not necessarily very pleasant. But also, even in food education settings, quite often you take the thing you've made home,
Mm.
or you leave it in the fridge and then forget it and don't ever take it home.
Mm.
So I think that is also really missing the opportunity, and particularly given the kind of the family environment of, the strain on two-parent income households, where actually a family meal is becoming rarer and rarer. Um, the power of eating together, and actually adults modeling as well. So when you go to schools and the teachers eat with the
Yeah.
children, it is so powerful because they're normalizing eating things, they're normalizing and modeling the
Yeah, the behaviors.
behaviors.
Mm.
Yeah, and being able to kind of table manners and conversation skills, and that's the beauty of food, is it can address many different elements of kind of life through just one very kind of universal element that is familiar to everybody. So it's
Mm.
yeah, it's really, really missing though.
Yeah. I guess because what goes the very beginning of all of this is food is something that we all have to consume. It's not a choice. It's not like, I don't know, clothes or a car or something that you
Yeah.
kind of have maybe options to opt out. But and then yeah, how that then comes back to the idea of yeah, what you choose. I guess just thinking about finishing then, are if there were, there's particular stakeholders in this. There's maybe young people themselves. There's the parents and adults involved in caring of children. There's then the staff community and teachers, and then we've got the kind of government policy piece. And I guess there's almost kind of requests that differ between all of them. But I don't know, particularly maybe the staff and the government piece. Is there anything you'd kind of either you're looking for at the moment that you're thinking we're hoping that this will change and shift, or equally with the staff piece, there's tangible things that they could be doing now within the current system as well, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's definitely, I think you're right to point out the kind of the variety of kind of people involved. And I always talk about it as that there are actually many, many beneficiaries of food education. I was at a conference a while ago and everyone was saying, oh, we need children to be food, food literate or understand about food. And it was people from hospitality, it was people from the public sector catering situation, it was people in sustainability.
Mm.
Everybody kind of benefits if people are taught about food. But also, if you speak to families, and actually, I've never found any research about that in England or the UK, but certainly there's lots of research in Australia that says that families and parents assume that they're going to get taught about this stuff at school.
Okay.
And so there's a real disconnect, I think. And I
Mm.
don't think necessarily, and this is why I'm in the research role, because I think there's such a gap in the research that actually government doesn't necessarily understand that that's what families
Yeah,
are
exactly.
expecting to happen in school.
Mm.
And they assume it happens in school. So then you've got a disconnect between the teachers as well and what's happening in a school.
Yeah.
And actually, the reason why my children's school at Prendergast is so focused is because our head teacher assumed that would be part of their education. So she said, of course, children need to learn to cook before they leave primary.
Mm.
Like it was very obvious to her,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
she
yeah.
was a parent.
Mm.
But I think there are lots of things that you can do, and I think one of the from a teacher's perspective, I think one of the simplest things to do, and this is what I did when I went into my children's school to teach, is use food to teach the curriculum. So don't look at it as a separate curriculum that needs to be squeezed into already packed agenda. Um, Look at using food to deliver the rest of the curriculum. And that's the approach we take at TastEd as well. So you can learn history through food, you
Yeah.
can learn maths through food. I've done things like fractions. And what's really interesting when you do this approach is it really consolidates the knowledge. So it really helps children to put the kind of theory into practice. So whether it's you're making mocktails and you're doing lots of little
Yeah, yeah,
liquid
yeah, yeah.
measurements,
I can
that's
picture that. Yeah,
maths.
yeah, yeah.
Or if you're doing, like I used to love doing, we used to make our own tortilla chips. So taking a tortilla, cutting it into whatever fraction you want it into, and then you just brush them with oil and bake them. But also, we've got, you can do science. There's so much science stuff you can do through food as well.
Mm.
So I think using the curriculum, I used to look at the termly curriculum map for each year group and go, okay, oh, we've got art, or we could,
Mm,
do some still life drawing, and
yeah.
that's connecting children to food. So it can be something just as simple as that.
Mm,
Because for me, that's the exciting thing about food is it connects to everything.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's a very simple way of doing
You've
something.
got me thinking then, like as a geography teacher, there's so many things where we could probably have pushed on the food more. I think
Yeah.
we went to Iceland and we then looked at Icelandic food and we did food tasting. But equally, there's so many places around the world that we're exploring that we could think about what their like
Yeah.
the sort of main meals are. What are the crops that they grow there? What are they eating and consuming?
Yeah.
I mean, we did. There was definitely, I remember doing a series of lessons where we were looking at how much people spent on food across the world, and then what their kind of their number of their calorie intake, and then also what the main food types were, and kind of also then how they gained those. And there's a really good series of images actually of families with the food, their like weekly food laid out in front of them.
Oh, right.
I don't know where that came from, but again, yeah, there's so many ways that food you could bring food to the fore in terms of your
Yeah.
teaching.
And
Because I
I
think
think what's really interesting about food is it actually brings the curriculum, which sometimes can be not exciting for
yeah, I
everybody.
think that's what I was
It
going to
really
say. Yeah.
brings it to life.
Yeah. So much
It's
of what is
because
being
it's
taught is
tangible.
hypothetical and abstract. And
Yeah.
I think that maybe is a really fundamental issue with so much of the curriculum is, and that, again, there's so many reasons why in terms of how the ease of teaching and the ease of having anyone come along and teach this. But that sense
Yeah.
of saying, look, actually, let's use the things happening around us in the world, the really meaningful things to connect with and to
Yeah.
make that a learning experience rather than let's, I don't know, talk about some really abstract idea. And
Yeah, and I think that's the opportunity with sustainability and climate change has not been really fully explored yet. I
mm,
think there's so much because we talked about action and hope, didn't we, with climate change, and I think food can facilitate so much of that, whether it's growing your own or reducing your food waste or
mm,
thinking about where you source your ingredients from, or all these things. I think actually it becomes meaningful because it then becomes something that's tangible to you that can really yeah, just give you some small things you
yeah.
can do.
And I guess it's sort of empowering because I mean you've talked about in some of those stories it's that sense of someone suddenly choosing to eat something. Well, that's their own volition, isn't it? Their own
Yeah.
choosing, and that sense that experience then can kind of grow and manifest, and it builds confidence and other.
Yeah.
Because I guess there's also all these other skills that people talk about as well. What about the government piece though as well? I mean, so obviously we've said there's a curriculum and assessment review, and there could be a far greater emphasis on food within that. But yeah, is there anything else that you're thinking? The other one is the food school standards, I guess, as well.
Yeah, school food standards. You've got the Ofsted review is going on at the moment, and also we've got a national food strategy being developed. And I've heard from people who've been facilitating that food education has been very prominent in that. So I'm ever hopeful that we get some progress about, raising the profile of food education to
Mm.
kind of help deliver all these different aspects of the curriculum.
I guess you just made me think as well, then there are these real champions within broader kind of food farming space. Henry Dimbleby,
Yeah.
one of them. But do we want to name just a few others? Of these are people really helping to champion food in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we've also got the Food Education Network, which has just been formed as well. So that's a kind of an alliance of food education organisations, and through that, we've got people like Dan Parker at Veg Power, who's
Hmm.
not a kind of typical food education organisation, but is really sees the value of food education in shifting children to eat more vegetables. We've also got organisations like School Food Matters, who have done a huge amount of work on driving the changes to school food standards and free school meals. Um, and and actually, I will say Stephen Morgan MP has been to see TastEd and seen lot. I think he's been out to see a lot of different food education organisations and really sees the value of it. So he's been, yeah, advocating, been sharing about some of the organisations he's been seeing too as well. So I'm hopeful he'll turn his attentions to education next after all the meals work he's been doing.
Cool. Well, I guess we have to say thank you so much, Kim.
Oh, thank
We've
you.
gone everywhere with this
Yeah,
conversation.
absolutely.
But actually, it was one when we did meet in Hackney. I thought, God, I really wanted this conversation, and I know when we did the workshop, we didn't have the time and the space really to do this.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I've got a list of lots of other things that I can now go and think about and connecting food and sustainability.
I
So
guess well, that's maybe the other thing as well. If people wanted to sort of follow up on this, I know we've talked about lots of other organisations, but is there any kind of academic writing or a book or anything, or that people you could direct people towards? Um,
in terms of food and sustainability, not off the top of my head, but there will be definitely stuff out there,
I guess we
which
can
I
maybe link
can
some of this below. I was
link.
just wondering
Yeah.
if there's anything that you've written yourself, Kim. Have you
Not yet, not quite there.
how much longer have you
I've
got
got
with
a
the
paper
PhD?
on food education in primary schools, which is out, was published, yeah, but I'm working on stuff as well.
Okay,
It
well,
takes a long time in academia.
well, I guess yeah. I guess we hope that the conversation keeps going,
Yeah, definitely.
and it's going to be a really interesting space because yeah, there's so much potential,
There
or
is.
it could just keep perpetuating the way it is at the moment. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that's really good.
Well, yeah, cheers, Kim.
Oh,
Thank you.
thanks very much.
Bye.